to maybe talk a little bit about how you ended up where you are. I know my own story is pretty serendipitous. I mean, I had no real knowledge of venture capital. As I mentioned before, I was an investment banker. The prospect of moving from investment banking to venture capital, where you do very similar work, the big difference is once that transaction's done, you got to live with it versus moving on to the next transaction. And I actually liked that part of it. And then ultimately, the prospect of building decent wealth over time if you're successful. And I took a chance. At least in my mind, I felt like I took a chance, and it's worked out well. But very serendipitous is how I got into venture capital. I'm curious to hear their stories too. I wouldn't be surprised if it's something similar.
My path at Brown is probably atypical as it relates to kind of the average person generally, but I think very typical as it relates to the average Brown graduate. I changed my major 3 times. So I started out as a physics and calculus concentrator just based on stuff I did in high school. Realized very quickly after about a year that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a lab coat surrounded by my colleagues back then, so I changed into engineering, which I thought was a more practical application of the same kind of background and skill set. And then after a year doing that, I actually started working for Brown Student Agencies, so a student-run company that is still on campus, and fell in love with it. So I wore a lot of hats for BSA. I ended up running the whole thing my junior year, so the first junior to actually run BSA. Coming out of Brown, I was hired by 2 Brown folks. So the good news about working for BSA is I got a phenomenal working experience. The bad news is I got a little too into it. And so I was working 40 hours a week at BSA. I was going out and having a very active social life, as you can imagine, and there wasn't much time in between those 2 things for actually sitting down and going to classes. Coming out of Brown, I wanted to do investment banking. Investment banking can fill their entire classes with people who have 4.0 GPAs, and I did not. So I ended up actually, I got an alternate slot at Smith Barney, which is now obviously Smith Barney and now Citigroup. And alternate means you only get an interview if someone doesn't show up, and everyone always shows up for their interview. So it basically means you're not getting an interview. But they invited me to the cocktail party the night before. I ended up meeting a guy who turned out to be the Brown team captain, so he was the recruiting lead. He and I spoke, literally he just spoke to me for 2 hours. We had a phenomenal conversation. We talked about everything but investment banking, so it was just one of those great meeting of the minds. At the end, he said, "What time's your interview tomorrow?" I said, "Actually, I don't have an interview yet. I'm on the alternate list. I just showed up for the free booze." He laughed and said, "Show up at lunch. We're going to give you an interview." So showed up at lunch. They interviewed me. 2 weeks later, they flew me down, and the rest, as they say, is history. So worked for 2 Brown guys actually coming out of school. Did that for 2 years, focused on tech. So I'm a tech guy by interest and background, although I wasn't a CS person at Brown. So I actually built my first website in 1994, BSA's first website. Coded it myself to those earlier points, so learned how to code in languages that no longer exist, much like my fellow older compatriots here. And so I wanted to stay in technology, so I went to work for a venture capital firm called Patrick Hoff & Co. Ventures. It's now called Apex Partners. And the way I got that job, to your point in question earlier, was really the old-fashioned way. So I just sent out a bunch of resumes. The fact that I had taught myself to code, the fact that I had architected a website was a distinguishing factor in 1998 when I was applying for all of these jobs. And so fortunately found a firm here in New York that was willing to take me on. That was 13 years ago, and I'm still in the venture capital business.
Let's see, I was a lacrosse player like you guys, and I went to Harvard. I was an econ major. And I remember I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career, and everyone on my team went to investment banking or sales and trading, so I figured, hey, you know what, I'd go down the interview path. I had good grades. I didn't have the 4 O's as well. I started applying for interviews, and I remember talking to a couple of my buddies on the team and some of their brothers, and they said, you know what, about trading and sales and trading, you can make a lot of money, but at some point in time you kind of get bored. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, let's say I'm a trader, and back then, before the euro currency, a friend was trading the Deutschmark dollar. He's like, man, I could be the best Deutschmark dollar guy in the world. But then 10 years later, I want to do something else. What else do I have? I mean, I've got some sales experience, but I know those markets really well. And then at the time, it was funny. It's like my market just might disappear and vaporize, and there's no Deutschmark dollar anymore, or the franc or whatever. So, and then on the banking side, I remember having an interview, with one of the more second-tier banks. I wasn't getting invited to Goldman or places like that because of my grades. And I, was in my fourth interview, and a guy comes in and says, "All right, you're getting ready to go on a ski trip. It's Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You've been planning this for about 3 months." And I put a stack of like 8 books in your desk. It's like, "What are you going to do?" I just sat there and I froze for like 10 seconds. And then I just said, "You know what? I go skiing." And I felt like my whole life flashed right in front of me. But I sat there thinking to myself, like, I don't need to deal with this bullshit. If the guy he just really was testing me just to like screw around with me. I was like, I don't want to work in a place where people screw around with you. If it's productive, I do it. But I could tell he was testing me. So my whole life flashed in front of me. I knew I could have gotten the job if I said yes, but I said no. And I pissed off, my friend's brother that got me the interview and everything else. And I realized, I want to try to do something else. So a friend of mine, his brother was in venture capital. He said, it's like being a player coach. I said, what does that mean? He's like, well, if you're building a company, you're the player. If you're in venture capital in the earlier stages versus, later stages, but I'm talking about the formation of the business, you can actually dive in and play a little bit, right? Help out a little bit here and there, but also coach. So, and the other thing I think about is that if you become an entrepreneur, it's putting all your eggs in one basket in one company. And if you fail, then you probably, it's a great learning experience, but it's hard to kind of, make money. And then being a VC, you can put your hands in 20 different baskets, let's say, and if one of them takes off, you do well, but not as well as that entrepreneur that takes off. So I said, hey, this is great. Player coach, doing things instead of, juggling the ball and, writing presentations and trying to raise money for folks. So I applied to about 100 different places and only got one letter back. And the person said, you have no business experience at all. My suggestion is go out and get some business experience. So I said, all right. I started looking through the job binders, which were a little off the beaten path. And I figured, hey, you know what? If I want to manage money, I might as well figure out how to, work at a fund. So I started my first job at Equitable Real Estate Investment Management. They had a $3 billion fund. They had 2 partners basically managing it and no analyst. So I said, hey, here you go. So I was working directly with these guys, having all these big meetings. They didn't even know how to manage me at all. I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to figure out where the bathroom was. And so eventually I did that for about a year. It was kind of boring because there was no one else I was even close to my age that I could work with. So some points in time I was really busy, other points I was doing nothing. So I figured I'd try to go somewhere else on the fund management side. I went into derivatives investing at JP Morgan. A friend of mine from the lacrosse team introduced me to some folks over there, so you'll see the whole networking connection. I did that for about 2 years, and that's where I learned how to program a little bit, got into trading, got into kind of more software programming, got into the internet when Mosaic came out. And after that, I was like, all right, so now I've got some business experience. I'll either go into hedge funds, I'll apply to business school. So I applied to Harvard and Stanford, and once again, I had minimal management experience. So that didn't help. I didn't get into those schools. But I got into Wharton and Chicago, which were more hedge fund oriented at the time. But then I saw an ad in the Wall Street Journal that said, looking for a venture capital associate. I was like, what the hell, I'll send it in. So I got a call back like 2 days later. The guy's like, I've seen 200 resumes. Your resume stood out. Come on in. So I interviewed randomly with this guy named John Barry. They had just raised a fund. They're looking for someone young to kind of come in. He asked me a ton of questions on technology, and having been in JP Morgan working on some tech stuff as well, I was able to answer a lot of them. He's like, well, you know more than me. Come on in and join me. So to the chagrin of my parents, I said no to business school. I went to this fund called the Prospect Street New York City Discovery Fund in 1996, 17 years ago. So I was there for about 2 years, and during that time I met a guy named Bob Lesson, who was vice chairman of Smith Barney. He probably put about $15 million of his own money into startups, investing in, for example, a company called GoTo.com, which became Overture, which created basically the AdSense, the pay-per-click technology, made a killing. And I said, hey, Ed, I brought him into actually 3 investments that I had done, and he's like, you know what? I speak the corporate world really well. You speak the internet world. Why don't you come join me and run my fund? And I said, me? So that was in 1998. So I started a fund called Dawn Treader Ventures with Bob Lesson in 1998, and I've just started my 4th fund just recently. So I've been doing the seed internet investing. I like to say for better or for worse, because it's been a roller coaster ride. I've had plenty of friends that have made a lot more money than me doing the hedge fund stuff, but I wake up every day just jazzed up about what I'm doing. I mean, I get pumped up. It's like getting up in the morning and playing lacrosse, right?
As I said, I went to work for a guy who was a personal financial planner, and the timing was just perfect and very lucky, and I got involved in doing mortgage origination. And you think about great jobs. mortgage origination is like filling out a credit application over and over and over again, right? I mean, it wasn't very interesting at all, but there was great money. I mean, it was an unbelievable time. And you know, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about money, but I'm telling you, I wasn't happy. I was making a lot of money. I was living in Boston, living with my girlfriend, having a great time, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had this deferred business school application acceptance, so I went out to California. Never been out to California. It's fantastic, great experience. Met some phenomenal people. Had no idea what their worlds were like until I got there. You know, the banking world, the consulting world, everything. Just didn't have a clue. When I got out of business school, I was pretty sure that I wanted to be involved in running a business. You know, and I had a little bit of that arrogance that I talked about. Why can't I run a business? And everybody interviewed me said to me, "You have no experience running a business. Why don't you go become a venture capitalist?" I thought that was pretty funny because 20 years later, when we're out raising a fund, everybody looked at me and said, "All you've been doing is running a business. You have no idea how to be a fund manager." So times have changed, but the significant point in that is now operating experience in funds, venture funds and private equity funds of all types is at a huge premium. So the advice that the gentleman who's sitting over there said about what should your first job be, go to a company where you admire what they're doing and the people are smart. And don't worry one bit about what you do. Get in there any way you can, because what you're trying to do is just build a story, right? And it's just like, you know, you guys all play lacrosse, you're all stars on your team. Somebody found you, recruited you, Lars, right, decided you're good. Now you're competing against all these great people. You differentiate yourself in high school based on the fact that you're bigger, faster, stronger, something like that. Lacrosse, you got to have more than that on this team to fill your role. You go to a company where you think you can get great experience and great exposure, right? They're not always necessarily the same thing. You do whatever it can take to help you build a story that will help you on your path to be entrepreneurial or in a fund. But I think that helped, and that's where I got lucky. Out of business school, I went to work for a company called VMX, or voice processing. I had 2 different jobs, opportunities, both with voicemail companies. One was to be a competitive analyst, one of 6 at Octo, which was the darling of the industry. The other one was to be one of 1 at VMX, which had invented voicemail and was struggling. I took $10,000 less to go to VMX. I liked the person who was hiring me. She was a terrific woman. She proved to be a great mentor. That's the second great lesson and lucky thing in my life. Finding someone who will help you along your way. And she just taught me a bunch of great things. I got to go to Europe with them, open up the European markets. That gave me international experience. All the French that I had taken in high school and college, didn't matter one bit, but the international experience was fantastic. Came back, just continued to parlay my career, moving up the ladder of sales and marketing. And we talked about sales. I'll tell you, like, sales is like a dirty word in business school. No one ever wants to say they want to go into a sales career, except in the financial sales and trading. And I'm telling you, it's a phenomenal skill. You're always selling, no matter what you're doing, raising money, trying to bring in investors, trying to bring in new customers, trying to get a job. Anyway, I'll digress on that. But sales and marketing, worked my way up, got into a position where I got to run a company, struggling company. Ultimately, the company failed, but we parlayed that into another investment, and that was the self-checkout, and that took off. Got sold with that company to IBM. That was like the worst 2.5 years of my career trying to work at IBM. I was a highly acclaimed acquired executive. It was not the culture for me. They treated me really well. They're a great company for some people. It just didn't work well for me. When I got out, one of the investors in Productivity Solutions said, we've been doing this one at a time on investments. Why don't we go out and raise a fund? We thought it would be easy. We had this great operating experience, this great track record. Everybody looked at us like we were crazy. We raised a little bit of money. We put it to work like it was a lot of money, and we raised a second fund. And now we have about 9 investments. We don't do any tech. We don't do any biotech. We do things that we can see, feel, taste, and touch. We're very operationally oriented. So you talk about a player coach, we're very much the player coaches. And we like that. And that's a very different model than some of the other private equity models. You heard some disparaging remarks about private equity. We're involved. We're not financial engineers. We only make money if the companies grow and become profitable. We like that.
What do you look for in terms of hiring at your own firms? What kind of experience, that kind of thing? And then also, what makes each of you guys different in that? So like, what is structurally different about your firm that you're early stage at and your middle stage, Dan? I mean, could you just give us a general overview on why you guys have made those strategic decisions?
Yeah. Sure. I'm a seed guy, so I've always been doing early stage investments, participating in the first round. I find it most exciting. It's probably the riskiest part of the spectrum, and at the end of the day, you're really betting on people. And I felt like I'm a pretty good people person, and I feel pretty entrepreneurial. I mean, when I was in college, I started my window washing business. It's a great business, by the way. I also worked at, college pro painting and all the other stuff. So I sold Cutco knives. So selling, right? It always goes back to selling. So I just love the idea of kind of having a white piece of paper and saying, 3 years from now, we have no freaking idea. These are some really smart engineering guys. They've got an interesting product. And I love the idea of trying to help them kind of get it out to market. So most of the stuff I do is stuff you don't see, which is selling other businesses. But a couple of consumer things I've done include Indiegogo. I was the first investor in that, which is a crowdfunding platform, probably second to Kickstarter right now. I like to think first, but they are second. They will be first. The other one is QuizUp. You guys should take a look at that on your iPhone and play around with it. The thing is growing exponentially right now as we speak. Servers are blowing up, but we had no idea. I mean, we invested in a very smart guy. This guy, Thor Fredrickson, he had distributed another game before through Chilingo, which actually had distributed Angry Birds. We got a bunch of interesting investors together who all had different experiences. And so the exciting part of just watching this launch come out and even seeing my kids, challenge their friends on it and trying to be #1 in science, it just to me is very exciting and fun. Of course, if you're having fun, then I think the money part happens later, right? You have to love what you're doing, and everything will take care of itself.
I think I would echo that, the concept of love what you're doing. So over the course of my career, I've actually done a mixture of early stage, growth stage, and then even later stage. I've done some buyout activity on a leverage basis, but not highly leveraged, not what you think of when you think of KKR, Blackstone, et cetera, but still majority deals. So I've done the spectrum. And as my career kind of progressed, I just came to the conclusion that my skill set was best suited towards, and my enjoyment level was highest around this concept of growth stage investing. So the difference in my world is, or the way I think about things, with early stage, you really are betting on the person in the market. So you don't have a lot to dig into. What I found very, very difficult for me was, and I always thought of this as sort of a dirty little secret, maybe I just picked the wrong investments, but you end up spending a lot of your time working with the ones that aren't working, right? And the way the model works is you need to have a small number that do work, and over time that can work, but when you think about where at least I was spending most of my time, I was trying to fix problems, quite candidly. Again, may have been the vintage in which I was investing, or again, the companies I simply picked, but it was an aspect of that stage of investing I just didn't think I was enjoying as much, or my skill set was as finely tuned towards. Later stage, similarly, was not a great personality fit for me. I like growth, right? So if the exercise is more a financial modeling exercise where you're really just building out an Excel spreadsheet, trying to figure out what every incremental cash flow dollar can be to support every incremental dollar of leverage on top of it, that to me wasn't exciting, wasn't dynamic, wasn't what I like doing. For me, growth was right in the middle of those two worlds, right? So we're still investing in rapidly growing companies, but there's stuff I can dig into. There are actual customers paying for the product, et cetera, et cetera. So again, for my skill set and enjoyment level, it's a great middle ground to settle in and around. To answer your first question, second, type of people we look for. Again, I've been kind of interviewing people for this career path for 15 years now, and I've kind of boiled it down to one thing that I actually really, really do try to look for and see, and it's the thing I've always called active intelligence. Everyone we interview is going to be smart. The intelligence level will always be high. There's something different between passive and active intelligence. Passive intelligence is someone who does a great job listening, very intelligent, can crank through analyses with great speed and efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. Active intelligence is someone who sits in a room with an entrepreneur, listens to what they say, and asks a question based on what they just said. So the difference I've seen in people, just to give an example, we'll do a script before we're meeting with, do a diligence call, right? We'll have the types of questions we want to ask. Passive intelligence folks, I've seen it happen, will read the question on the page, listen to the answer, write it down, and read the next question on the page. It is the most boring dynamic for both people on each side of that table you've ever seen. Active, intelligent people will listen to what they said, and regardless of what's on the next question on that page, will dig into it. They'll peel back the next level of that onion. In interviews, you can get a sense for that. So I get, within the first 30 seconds, I typically can tell by the way the person's eye contact sits, by the first couple of things they say. I can usually tell pretty quickly whether the person has that dynamicism of intelligence beyond just being a smart person.
You want to talk about it?
I like the description of the descriptor of active intelligence in terms of hiring people. You know, when we interview people at all different levels for all different jobs, but that active intelligence is exactly right. Don't just answer the question. Listen, have your agenda, the points you want to get across. Listen to the questions that are being asked. Try and answer the question, but like a good politician, take it a little bit further. And one of the great techniques is turning it into a question where they can relate something that they're looking for that you can apply back to. So we're definitely looking for people that are personable, interactive. Intelligence is just the cost of entry. There's a lot of smart people out there. In terms of the business fund, you know, I smile whenever I hear people say they want to get into private equity. Private equity is like what we all do. And on the one end, you've heard about from some really great successful entrepreneurs, and on the other end, way up there are the services and the bank capitals. You know, they make big deals, and they're really looking to try and figure out how to lever it up to put the least amount of equity in they can, and find the greatest economies and maybe the greatest synergies combining things, or else disposing of different things. We're much more on the venture side. We really do invest in essentially what are broken venture deals. So in a lot of easy to understand consumer products, media, things like that. And we like people make the investment successful, but when we're investing, we're not investing in the people who got them into trouble. We're almost always taking on the burden. We like dealing with some of the problems, and it's just different character attributes. I know, as I said earlier, I've never had a great original idea in my life. I could never be an entrepreneur, but I love the entrepreneurial environment. In my whole career, I've been a supporting cast member to some significant entrepreneurs. And that's really exciting to me. That's, you know, that's like I said, the ground ball analogy. I'm maybe the ground ball guy, I'm not the scorer. That's all right. I love what I do. And so we invest in companies that are generally troubled. The fundamental premise is we've got to believe that they're in the market that's large enough to be of interest, with a product that's differentiated enough that we can be passionate about. You know, that word passion you'll hear keep coming up. And that's what we do.
I'd like to interject one other point on what I look for in hiring. I think the active intelligence point is a great point. You know, I think selling is something you should always try to sell, because at the end of the day, all of our jobs are very competitive. Money is out there everywhere, and we always have to sell and compete, not only with putting investment dollars in, but also what can we do for the portfolio company and what the personality type is. And then the bottom line for me is I look for hustlers as well. You know, are you always hustling? So you guys should always be networking, always be reaching out. Even if someone says no, I've had people say no to me a million times. I mean, they still say no to me, but at the same time, I'll find a way a couple weeks later and say, hey, I thought this might be interesting to you. You know, can we have a chat, right? So just always hustling and never give up, I think, is a big, important mentality when you're doing your job search or in anything you're doing to be successful. And I look for that kind of mentality as well.
I want to thank you guys for